I will hand you over now to the lovely Katrina Crowe, who is the curator here of the first Thought Talk. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack, and welcome to all of you this beautiful sunny morning. Who would have thought it, that the second weekend of the festival in Galway would be unrelenting sunshine? That's not normally what happens. Anyway, we're all the more grateful to you for coming here this morning for this very important event when you could be out swimming in the sea. COPE, which is Galway's wonderful service for homeless people, is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year, and that in itself is a huge achievement, to be a voluntary organisation that does the work that it does, that has survived for 60 years, because as someone who's been involved in various community development organisations myself, I know how precarious that can be. So they deserve huge congratulations and thanks for that. But of course they have expanded their services during those 60 years. And one of the issues that they are dealing with now and for many years is one of the most pressing problems in Ireland today, domestic violence. And I'm putting out a plea to men everywhere to get involved in combating domestic violence. Of course, it's not only men who abuse, but it is overwhelmingly men who abuse. And they have to start standing up for themselves and for women and playing an active role in trying to combat this pernicious overflow of horror that's going on in people's lives. So we're going to have Gillian McNamee. She's the head of COPE's Domestic Abuse Service. Michael Smyth, who's the CEO of the organisation, and Betsy Cornwell, who has been with us before at First Thought, who was a former client of the project and who's the instigator of the wonderful Old Sewing Factory project. The event will be moderated by the wonderful Elaine Feeney, poet and novelist. Her latest book is called Let Me Go Mad in My Own Way, and having finished it a while ago, I can recommend it very highly to you. Be prepared to cry, but they're good tears, and you'll enjoy it. So please welcome Elaine Feeney and her guests.
Thank you very much, Katrina, and you're all very welcome to the First Thought Talks this morning. We did say, the four of us upstairs, it's a bit like mass time, but this is far more important, I think, where we are exploring the big issues and the challenges of today. And as Katrina said, I'm Elaine Feeney, and I'm joined by the wonderful Betsy Cornwell, Michael Smyth, the CEO of COPE, and Gillian McNamee, who also works with COPE. And Katrina went through your bios there very briefly, so I won't labour on them. This is going to run for about an hour. We're going to have a conversation and a chat about COPE at 60, and then we will open the last 10 to 15 minutes to the audience for audience questions. Michael, I might start and open the conversation with you, and perhaps you would like to maybe do an introduction for anybody that's not familiar with your services and what COPE is about, please.
Sure. So, as you can see from our logo at the start of today's talk, COPE Galway is celebrating 60 years in existence today, this year. A phenomenal feat for an organisation that, for a long number of years, didn't have, core funding or didn't have backing from state or government, that kind of thing. So, it's been a journey to get here. So on the 3rd of December 1965, an ad was placed in the local paper of the time asking for volunteers to come together to work on coordinating social services in Galway. At that time, the most prevalent issue of note was the support of seniors in the local community that didn't have access to light and heat in their homes, living in poverty, some on very, very low incomes or none at all. So we set up a service, COPE Galway, as was then Galway Social Services Council, set up a service for older people in the community. And we were producing meals, the classic Meals on Wheels. Last year, for example, as to how it's grown and developed, we produced over 100,000 meals last year and delivered them right across the country. So that's where the journey began, as I said, 3rd of December 1965. Over the following 60 years, we developed the homeless services. That's our most significant service now in the organisation, with about 100, 120 staff, 8 locations across the city and county, and we supported over 1,200 clients of homeless services last year. To give an example of the prevalence of homelessness in our communities today, we had about 253 children that were homeless in Galway City and County last night. So it's a significant challenge that we deal with on a daily basis. And then the latest addition to our service provision was our domestic abuse service. We began having conversations as an organisation in 1979 and opened our first refuge in Waterside House in 1981. And Gillian might talk a little bit more about that.
Sure, yeah. So to start having the conversation in Galway in 1979, the first refuge in Ireland opened in 1974, so we're still kind of leading the way in Galway when it comes to services and being there to take a stand. And that's one of the things I think today for anybody that has come, you'll find on your seat there is a starfish with a nice little message on the back of it, and a self-care book as well. And what we're really asking is for champions within the community to go out and have brave conversations around maybe even just what you heard today, because sometimes it can be really uncomfortable to go out and talk about things like domestic abuse or misogyny, power and control. So it's really just to have that brave conversation, because every time we do have a brave conversation, we're opening the world for victims and survivors a little bit more, and we're making it safe for everybody. So I suppose that's my ask of people today, if that's the one thing that you're able to take away, but hopefully there'll be a lot more because we're all very interesting. So to set the scene really of where we were in 1981 when Waterside House opened, so this is representative of the book of the first unbelievable, phenomenal, brave women and children that came down to Waterside House. When it was set up, the neighbours were a bit worried about having a battered wives home in their community, so men were going to come out and patrol the area with Gardaí to make sure that the battered wives behind the doors were kept safe. You'll see, if you're able to see, it says where people came from, so Galway, Dublin, Mayo. Somebody came with 8 children. Like in 1981, how do you make it to Galway with 8 children if you don't have a car? So my understanding at the time is that people used to drive so far, so if you were coming from Dublin, somebody bring you to Maynooth, Chatloan and forward on. And that was really a community response to domestic abuse. Whereas now I find working in the area that because we do have the services that people, when they realise that someone they love or they care for is in a domestic abuse relationship, it's referring you on to the service. And that's it, that's my job done. But it's really not. We really need to be having the conversations and to be supporting people, and just how powerful it is to say to someone, I believe you. And even just saying those 2 words to someone can absolutely, and I'm sure Betsy will touch on that later, just how powerful and meaningful that can be. So also you'll see on it that the alleged abuser, so we would no longer use that narrative anymore. We 100% believe the woman and it is the abuser. And it had to be her husband because he had to be married. Then the reason for abuse was alcohol, because that's the only reason that somebody would be abusive. Whereas now we know that domestic abuse happens within the framework of coercive control, and it's so far away from just because he hit me, or if he hit me I would leave, or I don't have any bruises. We really understand the complexity of the area a lot more now, and the amazing team that work within COPE Galway Domestic Abuse Service understand that and are able to meet people where they're at in their journey, and to in no way judge, and to be able to validate it. And I know even there on Friday, one of our managers, Amy, shared a quote from one of the clients that had sent in, and it was that Amy had told her, I believe you, and when she met her outreach worker, they said, I believe you as well. And to have it said, like, that is so unbelievably powerful. Also there you'll see the very last column is the PPS number with W at the end, because it was his PPS number and you were the wife of. To have your identity completely disregarded, like even in that logs, the woman's name isn't there, it's not represented. The children are just there as how many children. Whereas now we have a huge Solas Óg service, which does phenomenal work supporting 0 to 25. We go out and we work in schools, really creating the next kind of champions and the allies and the activisms. You know, there's young boys there who really love and care for their female classmates. And they don't realise that, you know, when the girls win a match, they don't get a tour of the parish. They don't have a scoreboard. They don't get the gear. They don't get to be the pride of the parish. And they're absolutely enraged, rightly so, but they're absolutely enraged. So that schoolwork is huge and has really come along, particularly now when you see a lot with the documentary Adolescence. I know that has really brought it out to the fore, and people are talking about it a lot more. So the work that we do in that is really helping with that preventative work and the prevention pillar under the Istanbul Convention and under zero tolerance. So really to kind of see, I suppose, how far we have come as a community and as a society when it comes to domestic abuse. We now have, this was an eight bed sit location with shared facilities for women and children, whereas now we have 10 apartments for women and children that are fleeing domestic abuse. But we also then have extensive outreach service, so we can work with women anywhere across Galway City and County. If they don't want to go to refuge, a refuge is not for them. And what we really want to do with things like today is to raise awareness around maybe what are the first signs. If you think that you're in a domestic abuse relationship, you can have those conversations before it gets worse, before you get more isolated, before you end up being cut off from your family and needing refuge. Because the last thing in the world that should be happening is that a woman and her children need to leave home and go to a refuge where he gets to stay at home. Whereas if at the time, while she still has or feels that she has the strength and the power and to get the natural resources to stay at home and to be able to get those orders and get those supports to be able to stay, and that's really where we're trying to pull out the focus. Absolutely, it's a shame that we need refuges, but I know the government's call at the moment for more refuges, and they make fantastic headlines and everything, but all we're doing is putting women and children back behind walls and into buildings, and because they're easier to move rather than tackling the actual problem. So having people and big champions within the community is hopefully going to make a huge dent in that, and to finally kind of tackle the problem and get to zero tolerance.
Thank you very much, Gillian. That's a wonderful introduction to the powerful work that you do. If I go back to something that you said, and I'm also really aware, you know, of 60 years and 1979 and the first refuge waterside house opening in those years, and I remembered the conversations amongst my aunts about it, about women who had gone there, and it was just the women who spoke about it, and it was hushed and silenced, and everybody, you know, knew they're in waterside house, and it came with almost the fear of the institutions. For me as a child, there was something that I was also afraid of that place as well. We might talk about the early coercive control in relationships, and as you said, not to get to this stage and so on. Betsy, I might just go to you and ask you to share with us part of your story that you feel comfortable with talking about, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I first came to COPE, I was actually referred by a marriage counselor. So my husband and I had started going to marriage counseling. That had actually happened because after our child was born, my husband told me he thought I had postpartum depression and anxiety, and because I was increasingly concerned about his behavior towards myself and our child. And so I brought that to my GP. She said it sounded like we needed marriage counseling. We went to marriage counseling, and the marriage counselor, thank goodness, pretty quickly said, I don't think you should be in marriage counseling. This is a case of extreme emotional abuse, and she referred me to COPE. And so it was actually through the outreach service that I came to COPE first, rather than through the refuge, which I think is really important to consider, that COPE isn't just a refuge, because I think it's a really good point that Gillian makes, that if you just have a domestic violence refuge and then there's a woman in your life who you're concerned about, you don't have to have those hard conversations. You can just say, oh, go talk to the refuge, go to the refuge. And you know, as crucial as that was for me, and my relationship did reach a crisis point where I did have to flee to the refuge, and again, that was unfortunately crucial. It was the outreach service, my incredible support worker who helped me so much, and who also introduced me to a group of other survivors and single mothers. And it was through meeting those other women, who are the best and most remarkable people I've ever met in my life, that I came to be so proud of being a survivor and being a single mother. And I'm a writer in my own work, and I crowdfunded the purchase of a historic knitting factory in Connemara, which I have turned into a family home for myself and my son, and also an art retreat space for other single mothers and single parents. And the reason that I did that is because I am so proud of what it means to be a single mother, and I want to celebrate that for other single moms as well, because I think there's still so much stigma around the concept of domestic abuse and of single motherhood, and there's this idea that it's something to be ashamed of. And I do have a lot of other accomplishments in my life, but being a single mother is the thing I'm most proud of that I've ever done. My son is 8 now, and having made an abuse-free home for him, I think, is the greatest thing I've ever done. And I think that's true of every single mom that I know. So I think I was really delighted to be asked to do this talk with COPE because I feel that COPE saved my life and my son's life, but also because I think it is really important to be continuing the work of making domestic abuse a community conversation, because it is, I mean, like, my husband never hit me, you know, it wasn't an instance of physical abuse. And that's something that so many people still want to simplify and want to say. And I used to say to my husband, oh, if you ever hit me, I'd leave you, you know? And I think that's that's a line a lot of us draw in the sand. And I think it's really important. And that's one of the reasons I've now written a memoir about my experience of domestic abuse and single motherhood and founding the Old Knitting Factory. It's really important to reflect, what are my moral lines in the sand, and are there things that I allow myself to do to other people, or that I allow other people to do to me, that actually are harmful, but you know, I think we need to have a more nuanced conversation and understanding about what domestic violence is. And that's, again, one of the reasons that it was the survivors group that was the most important part of what COPE did for me, because when I heard other women's stories of what their partners did to them, it was much harder for me to excuse what my husband was doing to me, because I loved him very much. And it was very easy for me, it still is very easy for me to sympathize with why he does the things he does. But when I was able to look at that as a pattern in context of what other women had experienced, it was much harder for me to refuse to see the course of control that was in play. And so I think it is only through, like, I'm not talking about my story, you know, I think there's this idea that survivors who talk about what they've been through are airing dirty laundry, or they want attention or something like that. And the reason that I'm talking about it is because it was hearing other people's stories that got me out, you know. And I think the more of us do that, the more we can save each other, maybe without even realizing it.
Thank you for sharing that. And that narrative about airing your dirty laundry, or this idea that you have to be hit or it has to be physical for it almost to be believed. Can you just, if we just reflect on what you've just spoke through and talked through, that moment when you went to the GP and the GP then sent you on to marriage counselling, that could have been a very different situation. Mm-hmm. And that could have had a very different outcome.
Yes.
I am very conscious of that first line when people go into these very busy places, and actually just conscious of the housing crisis that also complicates this idea of being able to get away or get out.
Absolutely.
In that moment, when you went to the counsellor, it was fortunate, I suppose, is maybe the right way to put it, that they could see what this was.
Absolutely.
Do any of you feel like in that first response, it is very difficult for a woman in the home, for her own safety, to try to make that call to a GP, and the GP will be the first place. Often we'll hear that they'll go with a different issue, an ailment that's continuing, and it'll be the very last conversation they'll have.
And I think, sorry, but just specifically that the ailment I went was my husband's assessment of my mental ill health. And I think that that's really important, that he was already trying to build a case that I was mentally unwell, and that my criticism of his behavior was because I was irrational. And I think there are so many women who are told that they are irrational, or even specifically that they have postpartum depression and anxiety, when what they really have are abusive partners.
That focus of him seeing criticism, we spoke a little bit briefly about this, Michael. I would like to talk about this for a minute. I said I'd worked with boys for 20 years in an all-boys institution, and they took criticism on a whole. This is it's a kind of a gross generalization, but we'll just use it for the context of the conversation, that they took criticism very, very personally, I noticed. That it really affected something about their fragility when I'd criticize, and I'd say, I'm not criticizing, this is an observation, it's not a criticism. And that they took it on a lot, particularly from a female teacher, as they got older and up the years in the school, as a criticism. We spoke a little bit about this. Can we talk a little bit about masculinity and the role that men have in this conversation?
Sure. So just to be really clear, I commend what Katrina said at the very outset in positioning the conversation. This is a male issue, in my opinion. This is something that if half of the population aren't engaged in the conversation we're never going to solve. So my role here today, and to sit on the stage, is to recognize that even from my position of influence, I'm white, heterosexual, privileged male, I need to be part of this conversation, otherwise this is never going to stop. It's easier for males to hear from another male, a peer potentially, that some of the characteristics that we learned growing up through becoming a man, are the challenges, are the issues, and it's as simple as that. So we refer to terms like toxic masculinity, and I'm not saying that it's all men. Nobody's saying that, and I think the hashtag that came out a couple of years ago, not all men, is actually wildly unhelpful because it comes from a position of defensiveness when we need to proactively engage in this. Even every part of the conversation thus far has been about the victim and not about the perpetrator, and there's something wrong with that also. The perpetrator is the individual that's at fault here. This is a male issue. They're the ones that are perpetrating this crime. It's illegal. And we need to recognize that we have an immense role in that. So as males, we need to come to the table in that regard. So just to talk a little bit about toxic masculinity, this is a vulnerable space for me, but I'm going to give an insight into even my own thoughts and self-reflections. I think introspection and personal reflective practice on your behaviours and how you engage with young males, with everybody, with other human beings is really important. I was talking to Betsy. I have an 18-month-old son at home, Oisín, and so he's 18 months. I heard someone say before that he's all feet and no brains, and that would absolutely be accurate, so it would at this stage of his life. But I'm sitting down with Oisín and teaching him characteristics that I believe he should have to be a man. So he'll fall and cut his knees, and I'll sit in front of him and ask him, and I'm not proud of this, but I'll ask him to suppress his emotion and not cry, and to say he needs to be brave and strong. And I check myself doing that, because that's wrong. I actually want to raise a son that is connected with his emotions, that is kind and compassionate, empathetic and vulnerable. And if I continue to position masculinity or manhood as something that is strength, that is domineering, that is control orientated, then I am feeding into the issue. So Dr. Jackson Katz talks a little bit about a pyramid of issue, right? So he's suggesting that at the top of the pyramid there are all of these issues in society. So domestic abuse, sexual abuse, rape, coercive control. That's the top of the pyramid, so that's shaded in. But feeding into that is the foundations of the pyramid, and these are all things that contribute to toxic masculinity. So the lyrics of rap songs that I grew up listening to when I was 15, 16, and how they showed an entitlement to possession or property of a female. Locker room conversations when I was in sporting clubs, and how somebody would say something and nobody would check him socially. We wouldn't call it out. That just wasn't done at the time. But then there was a few males that did, or that said, actually, that's not good, that's not good enough. So them kind of social constructs from a male-dominated patriarchy society has fed into us accepting that behaviours are okay, certain behaviours are okay, and that's the issue. So I'm not saying that every male has the potential to arrive at the top of the pyramid, but I am saying that every male has the potential to be involved in the foundations that contribute, that enable behaviours within masculine society to contribute to passiveness, to not calling out our peers when they say something that's inappropriate, to not being the person to stand up and walk away from a conversation or a group of friends when they subject a woman to something that she shouldn't be subjected to.
Yeah, absolutely. And you spoke about vulnerability and that you feel vulnerable here now.
Right now, yeah.
But there's great power in vulnerability, I think. And I think that's the narrative that needs to shift, actually, that there's great power in empathy, there's great power in sensitivity. They're the powerful things. And that we're teaching power in all the wrong ways from the very top of the world now. We talked about political leaders, sometimes sporting leaders and so on. Can I ask, when you did ask, when you had peers that called out other men on the behaviour, though, that does leave them in a vulnerable position in that group mentality, in that pack mentality, so to speak.
Sure. So I'd bring it to maybe a different perspective, right? Let's talk about leadership. And everybody has the potential to be leaders. Leaders aren't the words we say, they're the actions that we do as leaders. So everybody in this room has the potential to influence somebody. I'm not talking about leaders of organizations or political parties or governments. I'm talking about leadership in its most raw format, which is standing up for something that's not right. That's what it is. And that's what I want to raise. That's what I want to be. That's the person I want to be. That's the environment I want to create in the organization, such as COPE Galway. We had a town hall meeting there last week where everybody in the entire organisation got into a room over 2 days. And one of the sentiments I tried to get across in my opening address was, if somebody speaks to you in a manner that's not trauma-informed, or somebody speaks to you in a manner that doesn't contribute to the type of culture we want to create, call it out, because it's not okay. So providing people with autonomy and authority and people feeling empowered to do that, that's the types of environments I want to be part of and I want to help create. So to go back to the point, how did I try and contribute to that in the past? To be honest, I probably wasn't that aware of it before I joined the organisation, before I started having conversations like this. And I'm ashamed of that. But it's something I'm absolutely aware of now, and something I'm looking to. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm sitting on the stage, because it's so important, and only through engaging and creating them types of environments will we actually make a material difference here and stop this insidious crime.
Yeah, and surely that has to start at very early education and almost a whole retraining of maybe the way we teach and the way we go about teaching and inclusion in young men. Gillian, can I go to you for a minute and just ask you, do you think, I think societal perceptions of domestic violence play a big role in this, and I'm wondering, do you think that they have evolved at all over time and over the 60 years? I know that's before your time.
Thank God.
But, yeah, absolutely.
For acknowledging that.
Yeah, but while, you know, we always have this idea that things are progressive, and so if it starts 60 years ago, we're going to move in this linear progressive line forward, and people are going to become more educated, and people are going to know that this is a bad thing and that we can call this out and we can eradicate it, zero tolerance. But actually the statistics that I won't go into that I do have here, they're alarmingly bleak. In fact, 1/4 of women in Ireland will be sexually assaulted by a partner. That's so absolutely disturbing, and that's who have reported it. I think 65,000 reports of domestic violence were made to the guards in 2024. So obviously a lot done, a lot more to do, but I'm just wondering, have the societal perceptions have a lot to do with who will seek help? And obviously it's good that people are seeking the support, maybe.
Yeah, and like you say there, Elaine, so one in 3 women will be a victim survivor of domestic abuse, and 1 in 7 men. So even just looking around the room here, I am very conscious, and our helpline is on the back of both of the products that are on the door. But when we look even at the logbook that was up there a moment ago, you will see where it's got the occupation of the husband. And it's farmer, bricklayer, it's all working class occupations that are there, because those in higher or deemed to be in higher socioeconomic backgrounds tend to have more resources at hand, tend to have maybe a second home to go to, a family to reach out to, but also then tend to be able to reach out to our outreach service. Yeah. So last year our outreach service saw 1,414 appointments for women, which is phenomenal. It's currently quite a small team, but it is hopefully getting bigger, because that's where we really need to be putting in the resources. Having coffee mornings, like we were talking about upstairs about this morning, yes, you could be here or at Mass, that it doesn't always, it is a heavy and upsetting and triggering subject. But we need to be able to bring it out into the light, and we need to be able to have more conversations around it. I know we were talking at work during the week about having a over 30s disco. Some of the staff might need fake ID to get into it. But to be able to have those, to have awareness things around domestic abuse where people feel safer coming into the conversation and even just touching their toe into the water. Like we often get phone calls into the refuge. And it'll be about a donation or it'll be about a service, but I'm often very conscious it's actually people just testing out to see, well, what's it like if I rang? Yeah. And to hang up again. And how, I know you were saying the first interaction with the GP is so important, and we take that responsibility really, really heavy. and we make sure that anybody that rings our phone line, we take a deep breath, and we're so conscious of the person at the other end of the phone, and we'll always say, like, hi, this is Gillian, how can I help you? In the hope that that person automatically feels held and feels safe enough. Same when you come to, people come as a drop into the refuge, or will come for appointments, we'll come and meet them out at the gate. We have set it up in such a way that we have lavender and tea and coffee, and we want it to be that the glass bottle of Lucozade for when you're sick, that thing of being held. We have looked into having training around autism, intellectual disabilities, LBGT, immigration, all of the different complexities that we're now seeing in society. Having women come from a different culture where in their culture it absolutely is okay to treat a woman like that. And then they come to Ireland and they see, which we can be very proud of, that it's not okay. And that we validate the journey that you've been on. And like Michael says, you stand up for it and you let them know that no, and we will support you through that. So why society's perception of it has changed, there's also all these other complexities now at the moment of different cultures coming into the mix. And the far right, I don't think we can have this conversation without part of that. And things that have been happening up the north around, it's for women and girls. Up the north, you have the highest mortality rate. And they're not out there protesting when a woman is murdered by a man. They're blaming it on the far right because that's what they tried to do, and that's where the power and control and the misplaced drive behind it. So we need to steadfast in what we're trying to achieve and bring everybody along on that journey, bring all the men and boys, that it is a safe place for everybody to have that conversation, to come forward and to be heard and to be believed and to be supported. And that's the only way we will ever get towards zero tolerance.
Thank you. And I think that must be such a terrifying journey for any client to pick up the phone and make that first phone call, because of course, while we have come a long way in society, it feels like an utter, you're utterly going against the family in some ways, right? So the complexity for you, Betsy, like you said, when you very courageously told us your story, is that idea that I still loved him or love him and I can understand it. But because I had a child in that situation, I understood then that I was protecting something else. So it takes an awful lot for somebody to validate themselves, right? It's very difficult, and particularly if you're in this environment for a long time, it can be very erosive or corrosive, eroding of the person. And then to make that call, you need to have the right response, because you will hang up, you may never make the call again, and that's a lot of pressure on you, and it's a lot of pressure on your staff, and it's a lot of pressure on COPE. Before, I just want to ask you something, Betsy. Before I do that, how do you manage yourselves, and how do you all survive such a difficult work environment?
Over 30s discos.
I want to go to this. I definitely would, I think it's a good idea. Will there be a slow set?
And boys will have to start at one side and the girls the other.
I think we might have to go back to that,
and I could have my volleyball coach going around her umbrella in your dirty, dirty discos. We'll keep away from that. How do we manage ourselves? I would say I am absolutely blessed to have come into COPE Galway. I'm only 2.5 years in it. My background is supporting autistic people and people with disabilities. And the team that are there for a very long time. And without naming them or outing them for the length of time that they're there, but the experience that they bring is phenomenal. We have, yes, COPE Galway 60 years. We have now supported generations of family in domestic abuse. And to me, and that is something to be immensely, immensely proud of. You know, when somebody leaves our service or doesn't ring us back, our door is always open for that person to come back again, regardless. There's absolutely no judgment. If that person goes back to that relationship, there's no judgment. We always keep that space and try and treat each other in that trauma-informed way, and acknowledge that what we do is heavy. It really is heavy. And when I say to someone I work in domestic abuse, they're like, oh, that must be really hard. And it's not. Because the women and children that I see coming through those gates or out in the playground or sitting around having a cup of tea, laughing and joking, are absolute superheroes. They're phenomenal. I don't have the articulation to explain just how immensely motivating and proud. And I would love if more people could see, more people that are victim survivors could see themselves through my eyes.
Yeah.
And just how amazing that they are. And they're not this person that you see in the newspapers that are crowding in the corner. So that gives you as a worker hope.
Yeah.
Huge amount of hope. The teams have fantastic managers that support them. They have each other. We have somebody that is fantastic, Jackie, doing mindfulness, really bringing that in. The organisation itself has taken on trauma-informed practice across the whole organisation, has brought in resilience days. We do EAP, we do counselling, but really being able to create that safe space for each other and that psychological safety to check in with each other. To do the team building days, to just to even just name, you know what, that was crap. And that's okay. Like that is absolutely okay. And to be able to shake it off and to say, like when a woman comes in, to be that person with her, you know, you're not, it is heavy, but you're not holding it all for them. It's not yours to hold.
Yeah, and I think a community is so important, and this sounds like just a fantastic community. I think the only way forward we have in the current climate of the rise of the right and so on is community, grass-based, what we know within each other, and that sort of shared understanding of issues. Betsy, I might just go to you, and then I've just one more question, and we'll open it up to the audience. I have a million questions, but time. You have a memoir, and I'm wondering about the space for art and literature, how that felt to you as an artist, approaching this subject in a non-fiction way, because I know you're a best-selling New York Times fiction writer and an amazing teacher, because I work with you. I'm wondering how it felt, writing this memoir, how it felt to you. And
Thank you for asking that, and I think I really enjoyed talking with you about that just this morning. So this is my first nonfiction book, and it's also my first book for adults. My other books have been fantasy novels for young people, and or fantasy and historical novels. But I wrote this book as a survival tool when I briefly became homeless after leaving an abusive relationship. It was very frightening to not be able to provide a home for my child, and I developed this sort of absurd fantasy of writing a book that would allow me to buy a house, because as a lower income, self-employed, single immigrant, no one was going to give me a mortgage, you know? And so I thought if I could find a strange old building that nobody in Ireland wanted, and I could write a book about it, then I could sell it to my fellow Americans who really love stories of weird old Irish houses, you know? And it worked. And the longer it took me about 1.5 years of crowdfunding. I raised over 200,000 euros to buy the old knitting factory. Purchase was finalized in spring of 2022, and I've spent the last few years writing a book about it. And it has been, it's a strange experience. You know, I think writing is so private, and I'm by myself in a room, and I wrote this book. This book was a dream of creating a stable place for me to raise my child and a safe home for me to give my child. And this, because I was making a life as a writer before I left my relationship, that was the most likely path I saw into it. So it's what I've done. And it kind of didn't process for me how vulnerable it is to do it as nonfiction under my own name until the last few months. So I've been feeling a lot of feelings about it, you know. It is very personal, but I am very proud of it. And like I said, I think the reason to tell your story is because of the way, you know, we are social beings who understand our lives through storytelling, all of us. And so someone else's story helped me understand my own, and that's my highest hope for the book, is that I could do that for somebody else. And simultaneously, the Knitting Factory project is about celebrating artists who are single mothers, because I think, you know, it is incredibly hard to make a space for creative practice in any adult life, and but especially when you're parenting, and especially when you're single parenting, or have other sort of special caretaking duties. There's Virginia Woolf's concept of a room of one's own, that a woman, in order to be a writer, needs a steady income and a room of her own. And I want to read books by people who don't have a room of their own, you know? Like, I don't just want to hear from the people who have the luxury of writing all day and not thinking about laundry and making dinner, you know? And that's the other, you know, so this book, if I didn't have my caretaking duties, you know, I would have revised it a bit more. It'd probably be a better book, but I'm still proud of it for what it is. Yeah, you always have to let that go.
Best art is the abandoned art. Yeah.
But when I think about it, but this is the thing, I can look at the other single moms at COPE and be so amazed by everything that they do. I remember the first time I went to a group healing day with COPE, the first time I met other women who were victim survivors, one of the women I met was in her 80s, and she had just left a 60-year marriage. And she said to us,
Wow.
but what she said to us was she wishes she were as brave as we were to have left so much earlier. And that just astounded me, because it was so hard for me to leave a 5-year marriage that I can't imagine. I just thought, I wish I was as brave as her. And I think every survivor thinks that, or like, oh, what I did, whatever, but look at these other women, you know? And I think that's why we need to hear each other's stories. And that's what the Knitting Factory really is for, is to make a space for people who don't usually have the time and space to tell their stories, because those are the people we need to hear from, you know? And it's through all of my many privileges that I'm even able to be on the stage and using my own name to tell my story at all, you know? So, yeah.
I'm just going to finish up with one last impossible question, even though I promised them it wouldn't be like the Irish oral, but this might be the moment it is a little bit. It feels like it's an insurmountable task. It feels like we're living in the worst of times for role models, for young men in particular, and that for all these amazing heroic stories and all these women often that are doing this incredible heavy lifting and still in the domestic space, and men also, but women in particular in these instances, that they are vying for their sons and daughters, but sons' attentions with the internet, the rise of Tate. We see that other, I'm not even going to name him, Irish person. Anyway. And they're so heavily influenced by these guys. And I remember having a conversation with my sister-in-law about Andrew Tate at a family function years ago. One of my nephews is an excellent GIAF player, and she said, I don't know who that is. They don't know anything about this. And both of them knew exactly, as my sons did also. They knew exactly who Tate was. Yeah. I mean, Peterson looks like the kind of the kindergarten, you know, of what came to pass after that. And the utterly disgusting, misogynistic language that they're using towards women. And these are their caregivers. So these boys are going into these spaces at 11, 12, 13, and suddenly they're turning on caregivers and mothers because they're hearing this. Yeah. How, I know it's an impossible question, but I know we talked about adolescence at the top of this conversation, Stephen Graham's wonderful series. And it's not to panic everyone in the room either, because, you know, young people are wonderful and they have a lot to give, like you said, with Solas Óg, and that's a wonderful, wonderful initiative. So that's obviously one. But for any parent here, have you any advice? I know it's a really difficult question. I know my own feelings on it are just keep the conversations open, but are you seeing that it is influencing a change in the domestic violence sphere and that it is actually influencing it? In a bad way?
I can jump in first. So yes is the answer. This is surmountable.
Yeah.
These are learned characteristics. So how do we challenge that? And I see only one answer, and that's education. We need to be having the conversation at the right time in the right environments and creating environments for having these conversations as much as we possibly can. That'll be done through leadership, as I said. Mm-hmm. So in the school, in the classroom, at home, at the dinner table, in the sports clubs, right throughout society. This is a community response required. We have to do better. We have to do better. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that. We can unlearn these characteristics. And we'll only do that through introspection, self-reflection, and challenging the norms, the social norms that we thought were acceptable. Mm-hmm. You know, we've all grown up in some form of connection with relationship structures, whether that's in your own family setting or in a community. And taking time to look at how they played out and what they look like, but then also being facilitated about having conversations around what's a healthy relationship look like. Yeah. So that you can now begin to think. The best way of learning for most people is to challenge our thought process, to challenge how we think about certain things, not to be lectured on, mm-hmm. not to be called out. What we need is to call in. Mm-hmm. Bring them with us, mm-hmm. and we'll turn the tide.
Yeah.
That's what's required.
Thank you. Gillian, do you want to add anything before we open to the audience?
Yeah, I think the standard that we walk by is a standard that we accept. Mm. So by doing nothing, you really are doing something. Mm-hmm. You're allowing it to happen. And every problem that we face isn't going to be solved, but will never save the problem if we don't face it.
Yeah.
I think that's...
Thank you. Thank you very much. We would like to open this to any questions from the audience. If you can put your hand up. Have we a roving mic? We do.
Hi. It's only a few days since a mother and her 2 children were shot dead in Fermanagh. So we don't have all the details of that. I certainly don't have all the details, but we're looking at probably familicide. And we're back to thinking about how is it reported. Elaine, you mentioned societal perceptions, and we get those societal perceptions from the media and how events like this are reported, but not just what's reported, but how they are, the language they used, who the media talks to, who they go to for the vox pops, how the alleged perpetrator is described as part of their community. And it's a very broad question, but I'm wondering what needs to change in the media, in how they report domestic violence, domestic abuse, dating abuse, familicide, gender-based violence. If you could suggest something to the media, and this is open to anyone who wants to answer, what do they need to do better?
I might take that from Patrick. Hi, Patrick. Patrick works in our services, so he's one of the good men leading change. For me, when you look at the media, perpetrator or who is perpetrating is never named. It's, you know, it's the calls that we get in of how many people do you have in the refuge? Who cares? How many people are doing the abuse? Is the question. That's not out there. People are able to say, you know, 85 women bravely came to the refuge, but the number of men perpetrating the abuse is not recorded. It's not asked for. It doesn't make for a nice headline because people don't want to buy it. I would plead with anybody that's in media or is looking to go into media, that is such an important voice and platform that you have, to reach out to your local domestic abuse service and ask for training on domestic abuse. Like say, I thought I knew, I'm only 2.5 years working in the area, and I thought I knew what domestic abuse was. I hadn't a clue, not a clue. And therefore I don't expect somebody that works in journalism or that has a platform publicly to speak to know the ins and outs and the eccentricities of it, but by not knowing, you're actually being able to be an accomplice to what goes on. You know, you see in the media about, oh God, we never expected it in my area.
Yeah, the disconnect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, people talk about it as if it's not anywhere near them.
Yeah.
Then, the disconnect.
It's just a domestic. It doesn't just happen once. It's not just a once-off. He didn't just lose his temper. You know, there's so much more that goes on behind that. And for media and authors to have that understanding of exactly what it is, to be able to get it out there. So I would ask that people reach out and learn about the complexities of it, and then use that voice to amplify it and to play their part as a champion within the community to help eradicate it.
And it feels like we've moved away from news cycles of journalism to news cycles needing to be entertainment and so constant. And that's, you know, it's so disturbing, actually. It's less journalism and it's more, yeah. Thank you very much, Patrick, for the question. Lelia, please.
Small things, and thanks very much. It's been very enlightening and very a rewarding morning. The Irish mammy is responsible for a lot of this. Let us not forget the Irish mammy. Does COPE think that a mission to the Irish mammies in Ireland would be a good idea? To stop making little princes out of their little boys and indulging them in every possible bloody way. Anyway, that's just one thing. The other thing, which I think is really important, is the perpetration that continues for women who have to go to the courts. Has COPE taken on board, and can it perhaps persuade the powers in the court system and in the government to come to the aid of people and not have young women, old women, whoever, having their notes from very serious and important private meetings with a counsellor made public in court, and being themselves, in a sense, not the takers of a case, but in a way the victims in a court situation. Anyway, those were the ideas. Thank you very much.
I'm not brave enough to talk about the Irish Mammy, so I'll jump straight to the second question, if that's all right, Lilia. In terms of the Irish court system and how it's currently set up, we've made good progress nationally in terms of our legal frameworks around this issue, but how we engage in it as a society and how we've always engaged in it hasn't yet shifted, I believe. And it's kind of connected to the last question. It's still victim blaming to some extent when we drag somebody through the process of having to prove the issue, and that's fundamentally wrong. So we need to flip it in its entirety for it to be more focused on the perpetrator, and for us as a society, whether it's in the media or whether it's in the courts, for us to shift our focus away from the questioning, the querying, the engagement in what might be, whether it's journalistic issue or not, what might be the hook on the story, but actually what's the most important matter to engage in on the topic is the perpetration, is the issue. And that's where I'm interested in engaging on the topic is what's the solution like? And the solution is not in response. So the solution isn't in the courts, the solution isn't in the media, because it's already happened. That's the problem. We need to move upstream and engage with potential perpetrators before it becomes an issue of victim blaming or for the media or in the courts. So it's set up wrong at the minute, but it's moving in the right direction. And Gillian and her team and us as an organisation, we have an advocacy arm. We engage in these national conversations weekly, daily, and we're attempting to influence from the perspective of the victim survivor so that they're held with dignity, trusted, believed from the very outset and throughout the process. Because re-traumatization is one of the most significant challenges that our clients face on a daily basis. Having to retell their story again and again and again is just not okay.
Thank you.
Just the final point on that. Jim O'Callaghan has been, he's made a commitment to try and get that the client records won't be in court. That only bits that are absolutely pertinent will be read beforehand. So thankfully he is making moves on that as well. But there's also the acknowledgement that post-separation abuse goes on so much, and the perpetrator bringing the woman back to court again and again and again. But the courts let that happen. The courts have a massive role to play. One of the huge issues that we're finding is to be able to get access to solicitor through legal aid for our clients. And then I know what the team would tell me is then they go into court, judge is saying, why doesn't she have a solicitor? And saying, well, we can't get one judge. Judge stands out and goes, I need a solicitor, and 5 hands go up. That's what we need to flip. And again, it's back to education of the judicial system as well about how this is happening and how things are being manipulated to be able to push again the voice.
I just want to agree with that. I think as a survivor and someone who's been through the court system, which you can't talk that much about because of in-camera rules, but one of the things that I know I and my peers in the survivor group have longed for the most is just domestic abuse training for court workers and for judges especially, because you see these sort of rudimentary tricks that perpetrators do that are believed hook, line, and sinker for, over and over again, because I think a lot of judges don't work in family court long enough to see the patterns, and then they move on to criminal court and to other things. And so I think just to have judges have domestic abuse training would change so many people's lives, Yeah.
Thank you. We have one last question. I might just go to the Irish Mammy for a minute. As an Irish Mammy and having an Irish Mammy, and I haven't an answer for it, but I might ask a question. Is the morality of the Irish family still entwined with the Irish Mammy? And is she still responsible for the morality and therefore the success of the family, and to that, maybe she's parenting out of fear of that. Anyway.
And I can't speak to, right, as an, you know, I'm an Irish citizen now, I'm very proud of, but right, I can't speak to that culturally, but I think a lot of the conversations I have about domestic abuse in the US and in other countries as well, people long for a woman to blame for a man's behavior. And I think, and I think, yeah, I'm a mother of a son, and I hope that if he causes harm in his adult life, I'll be able to hold him accountable. I don't think that it is impossible that my sweet child could ever do wrong, you know, but I hope, you know, but I think we all need to be self-reflective and self-critical about the harm we can perpetuate and the harm we allow other people to perpetuate. But I think when you're talking about an adult, you can hold them accountable for their own actions, you know, and I have so many, I don't want punishment for my abusers. I would wish, in an ideal world, I would wish them help, but I don't think I should be the one to have to help them. I think I should have safety. And I also think that whatever their childhood circumstances, they are responsible for the harm they caused as adults. So.
We've one last question and then we better finish up. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to ask the question. Congrats to the panel, and particularly congratulations to Betsy for having the vulnerability and courage to get up there. And congrats to Katrina, while I have the mic, on a fabulous range of talks all week at the Arts Festival. Huge turnout for the talk about Gaza, huge level of interest and outrage. Huge level of interest and outrage at the two talks about what's happening in politics in America. And this is the turnout this morning for what should have an equal level of interest and an equal level of outrage. 65,000 cases, I think you said, reported. And I'm sure there's more to be added.
Absolutely.
Why isn't there the same level of interest and outrage in this topic? And if I could, a second question. I assume that perpetrators can be rehabilitated. And I wonder how close were you guys to having a rehabilitated perpetrator to hear a male voice? Because I noticed there's about 20% of the audience here are men. And it's difficult to be a man in this conversation. But how close were you to having somebody up there talking about rehabilitation and what has worked for somebody who has made those mistakes?
I'll take a stab at maybe both. So the first question, I think you kind of answered with your second question. It's a difficult topic. I wish this was a full auditorium. I wish that every single person in Ireland could hear this conversation, because I think every single person in Ireland needs to hear the conversation. That's what I'm suggesting in terms of leadership and how we move forward with education, etc. We need to bring it from here. If there's one ask that Gillian suggested at the very outset, if there's one ask from all of you here today, use the starfish as a mechanism to begin a conversation. Because if we begin the conversation, we begin to understand 65,000 cases, 1 in every 3 females across the entire country will be subjected to domestic abuse at some stage in their lives. Scary. So we need to have more conversations. We need to draw more people into the spaces. But I think what your sentiment at the second part of your question was, it's difficult. It's especially difficult to engage in this space as a male, knowing that we perpetrate 95% of these crimes. But only through engaging in the space will we ever make it better, and will we ever move in the right direction. So I think that's probably why it's not as full as it could or should be. But my hope is that will change through that mechanism. And the second part of your question, I would love to see something like that in terms of a male that was a perpetrator on the stage contributing. It's not our area of work in COPE Galway. We focus on women and children. It's probably not for me to answer, maybe better for Gillian, but our focus is women and children and supporting women and children affected by domestic abuse, subjected to domestic abuse is a stronger word. So we don't have the connections to invite or to bring someone that was a perpetrator. And I don't know whether it would be the right thing for us to do in terms of positioning ourselves as well as an organisation. We are here to hear the females and the children that have been subjected to domestic abuse. We want them to have zero barriers to engaging with us as an organisation, and we want to make sure that they always know that when they come to us, we'll never look at it from a perspective of someone that can be rehabilitated. We look at it from a perspective of hearing, believing, trusting, understanding, and holding them as much as we possibly can. Gillian, do you want to add?
Yeah, the only thing I would say about, and I totally agree, today should obviously be jam-packed and out the door. But if you look at how far we've come since 1981, the fact that the Galway International Arts Festival allowed us to have this space, its first thought talks, like this is the start of, please God, many more, you know. And we have to, every invitation that we have to have this conversation, we need to step up and have it, and to try and create the space that it's not as scary, that it's not as heavy, that people feel that they can come and be part of it and be free to ebb and flow out of it as they feel comfortable with. Because we're only going to isolate people and leave people out of the conversation if we don't create an environment where they can come and show up at where they're at. So hopefully this is the start of many, many more talks. Otherwise, we'll just start going around to masses at 11 o'clock on Sunday. But yeah, hopefully, you know, as the first mile, more and more people will come out. And when you guys all go out and you have your conversation about, you know what, actually was really interesting, that will then hopefully invite, if the Galway Arts Festival have us back, for more people to come the next day, you know. And
I'm really conscious that we started late, so I have one last question because I don't want to leave you out, and then we're done. Sorry.
Thanks for the talk, it was excellent. Just following up on what that gentleman said, yeah, I definitely think there should be a platform for perpetrators purely from raising awareness and kind of, I've always personally taught myself whenever I hear like about paedophilia, for instance, there's so much judgment and shame around it. Obviously, as there should be, because it's such a horrendous thing to happen. But I've always kind of thought, well, what makes somebody do that? It's so strange, because it can't be. It's not a normal thing that you would do to, you know, a child kind of thing. But I do think domestic violence is kind of the same. Nobody in their right mind does that to a person. What causes it in the first place? How does it happen? Why does it happen? And again, I think we never get to the root of those questions. So I agree, I totally understand what you've kind of said, that they're two different platforms and maybe it wouldn't be helpful for the victims to integrate the two.
I suppose I might speak on this. I suppose, yeah, this is possibly is a different platform, and we won't have the answers for that. And like Betsy said, people are allowed to go and find their own care and help in whatever way they want, but you need to be kept safe and here today also. So I suppose that's what I would say. Maybe Gillian,
yeah, I'll just quickly say I have a great book recommendation for you. There's a book called Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft that I read while I was still in my relationship, actually, and it's about, he calls it about angry and controlling men, but it's about the sort of, it's about how someone in their right mind can do such a thing, and it is very insightful. I highly recommend it. Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Betsy Cornwall, Michael, and Gillian McNamee, Michael Smyth, thank you so much. We had such great conversations upstairs. These are really, really incredibly remarkable people. Thank you so much for your generosity and for your time today. Thank you, and thank you for coming.